Every single day, roughly 85 million American women pick up a razor before they leave the house. Not because they want to, not because they thought about it, because at some point, shaving just became one of those things you do, like brushing your teeth, like putting on deodorant. And the industry built around that daily habit. It pulls in over $4 billion a year, globally. That's razors, wax strips, laser appointments, depilatory creams, epilators, subscription boxes. The average American woman will spend more than $10,000 on hair removal over the course of her lifetime. $10,000 removing something her body produces naturally, for free, on its own. And the wildest part isn't the money. It's that almost nobody asks why. Why do we do this? When did smooth skin become the default? And who decided that a woman's body hair, something every single human being grows, was a problem that needed solving? Because somebody did decide that. And the answer to when and how is one of the strangest stories you've never heard. But to understand it, we need to go way, way back. Further than you think. People were removing body hair before they were writing, before they were farming, before they had metal tools. Archaeologists have found sharpened flint blades dating back roughly 30,000 years, and the wear patterns on those stones suggest they were used to scrape hair from skin 30,000 years ago. People living in caves, painting animals on walls, hunting with stone-tipped spears were also, apparently, grooming. Some of the earliest evidence comes from what is now southern France. Cave-era humans were using sharpened seashells as tweezers, clamshell edges pressed together, pulling hair out one strand at a time. This was thousands of years before anyone invented the wheel, before anyone planted a seed on purpose, before written language existed, and already humans looked at their body hair and thought, this has to go. Now, those early humans probably had practical reasons. Fewer places for lice and parasites to hide, less for an enemy to grab in a fight. But by the time we reach ancient Egypt, around 3000 BCE, hair removal had become something else entirely. It had become culture. The Egyptians took grooming seriously. And when I say seriously, I mean priests in the temples of ancient Thebes and Memphis shaved every single hair on their bodies. Head, face, chest, arms, legs, eyebrows, eyelashes, everything, every 3 days. Because body hair was considered unclean in the presence of the gods. If you wanted to serve in the temple, you showed up smooth. And it wasn't just priests. Egyptian men and women across the upper classes removed body hair regularly. They used sharpened bronze razors that looked surprisingly similar to modern straight razors. They used beeswax and sugaring paste, a sticky mixture of sugar, lemon, and water that works almost exactly like the sugaring treatments you can book at a salon today in downtown Manhattan. The formula hasn't changed in 5,000 years. Egyptian women applied kohl to their eyes, wore elaborate wigs, and kept their skin completely smooth underneath. But here's what's important about all of this. The reason wasn't shame. Nobody in ancient Egypt was telling women that their body hair was disgusting, or embarrassing, or unfeminine. Hair removal was about status. It was about ritual. It was about presenting yourself as civilized, as close to the gods, as someone who had the time and resources to care about their appearance. Rich people were smooth. Poor people weren't. That was the divide, not men versus women. And Egypt wasn't alone. Cross the Mediterranean to ancient Rome, and you find the exact same thing, just louder and with more weird ingredients. Roman men removed their body hair. Roman women removed their body hair. It was a shared cultural practice, and the Romans went about it with the same enthusiasm they brought to aqueducts and road building. They used pumice stones to sand hair off their skin. They used iron tweezers, some of which have been found perfectly preserved at archaeological sites across Italy and Britain. And they used depilatory creams that make modern hair look like a gentle moisturizer. One Roman recipe, recorded by the writer Pliny the Elder, called for bat blood mixed with powdered viper. Another used resin mixed with goat bile. A popular cream for women involved crushed white vine and cat dung. These mixtures were applied to the skin and left until the hair dissolved or loosened enough to wipe away. Painful? Almost certainly. Effective? Apparently enough that the recipes survived for centuries. Roman public bathhouses offered professional hair removal as a standard service. You'd go in, soak, get oiled up, and then a servant called an Alipolis would pluck your hair out with tweezers or rub you down with pumice. Men and women, same service, same bathhouse routine. The poet Ovid wrote about grooming advice for both sexes. The satirist Juvenal mocked men who were too vain about their smooth legs. The point is, for thousands of years, across multiple civilizations, hair removal existed. But it existed as something completely different from what it is today. It was about class. It was about ritual. It was about aesthetics that applied equally to everyone. Nobody was building an industry around the idea that women's natural bodies were inherently wrong. For millennia, that's where the story stayed. A personal choice, a cultural practice, something people did because they wanted to, or because their social status demanded it, or because their religion required it. But if hair removal was gender neutral for all those centuries, something had to change. Something had to come along and split the practice in half, keeping it optional for men while turning it into an obligation for women. And that something didn't happen gradually. It happened in a very specific country at a very specific moment. And it started with a magazine ad. For roughly 1,000 years after Rome fell, nobody in Europe cared about women's body hair. And the reason is almost comically simple. You couldn't see it. Medieval European women were covered from neck to ankle, long sleeves, high collars, heavy fabrics. Modesty was the entire point of how women dressed in the Middle Ages, which meant that body hair, whatever a woman had going on underneath all that wool and linen, was invisible. And if nobody can see it, nobody has an opinion about it. Hair removal didn't disappear completely during this period. Some women still plucked their eyebrows or removed hair from their foreheads. But legs, armpits, nobody was even having that conversation. There was no beauty standard around body hair because body hair simply wasn't part of the public picture. The one famous exception actually proves the point. Queen Elizabeth I, in the late 1500s, was known for a very specific look. She removed her eyebrows and plucked her hairline back a full inch or more to create a high, rounded forehead. Pale skin, high forehead, no eyebrows. That was the beauty standard at the court of Queen Elizabeth in Tudor England. And notice what's completely absent from that list. Legs, armpits. The idea that a woman's body hair below the neck needed attention would have made zero sense to anyone in Elizabethan England. It just wasn't a category anyone thought in. So, for centuries, body hair on European women was a non-issue. Not because women were liberated, not because anyone had progressive ideas about body image, just because the clothes covered everything, and the question never came up. Then fashion changed, and this is where the story gets darker. In the early 1900s, Western women's clothing started to shift. Sleeves got shorter, necklines dropped, fabrics got lighter, and by around 1910, a new style was emerging in American fashion magazines: dresses with no sleeves. For the first time in modern Western history, women's underarms were visible in public. Now, think about what that means. For generations, nobody had ever seen a woman's armpit in a social setting. It was just a body part that existed under clothing, like a kneecap or a shoulder blade. And suddenly, there it was, exposed, and completely natural, which means it had hair. Nobody panicked at first. It was just new. Women wore the dresses. Some had visible underarm hair. The world kept turning, but somebody saw an opportunity. In May of 1915, a magazine called Harper's Bazaar ran an advertisement. It featured a woman in a sleeveless dress with her arms raised above her head, and the copy underneath targeted something no advertisement had ever targeted before: women's underarm hair. The ad didn't politely suggest that women might want to consider grooming. It used a very different kind of language. The words in that Harper's Bazaar ad described underarm hair as objectionable and embarrassing. It called visible hair under a woman's arms an ugly personal problem, not a choice, not a preference, a problem. Something wrong with you that needed to be fixed. This is 1915. A year earlier, no company on earth had ever told women that their underarm hair was shameful. There was no existing disgust to tap into. There was no cultural norm being reinforced. That ad wasn't responding to demand. It was manufacturing it, creating a brand new insecurity from scratch, and then selling the solution in the same breath. And the strategy worked almost immediately. Within 2 years, advertising for women's razors and depilatory creams had spread across major American magazines. The messaging was consistent and relentless. Your body has a problem, this product fixes it. You should be embarrassed if you don't act. Then came Wilkinson Sword. The British blade company had been making razors for men since the 1800s, but by the late 1910s, their strategists realized something that would reshape the entire industry. Women were an untapped market. Half the adult population didn't buy razors, not because they couldn't afford them, and not because the products didn't exist. Simply because nobody had ever told women they needed one. Wilkinson Sword launched a campaign specifically designed to change that. Their internal strategy documents, which surfaced decades later, were blunt about the goal. Convince women that underarm hair was unhygienic and unfeminine, then sell them the blade. The company didn't just want to reach women who already felt self-conscious. They wanted to create the self-consciousness first. And this is the part that shifts the entire story. Because up to this point, you could look at hair removal through history and see a bunch of different cultures making different choices for different reasons. Egyptians shaving for the gods, Romans grooming at the bathhouse, medieval Europeans ignoring the whole thing. All of it driven by culture, religion, class, personal preference. But what happened in 1915 wasn't any of those things. It was a business decision. A room full of people at an advertising firm looked at millions of women and said, "These women feel fine about their bodies. That's a problem for us. If they feel fine, they won't buy anything. So we need to make them feel not fine." That's not beauty evolving naturally. That's insecurity being engineered for profit. And within a single generation, it worked. By the 1920s, sleeveless dresses were everywhere, and hair removal products for women had become a staple of American advertising. Women who had never thought twice about their underarm hair were now buying razors and creams monthly. The shame had taken root. The ads worked. Within a generation, millions of American women were shaving daily. But the razor companies weren't satisfied with arms and armpits. They wanted legs too. And to get them, they'd need something bigger than a magazine ad. They'd need a war. In 1941, the United States entered World War II, and almost immediately, something happened on the home front that had nothing to do with combat, nothing to do with strategy, and everything to do with women's legs. Nylon disappeared. Before the war, American women wore nylon stockings. Practically everyone did. Stockings were the default. They covered your legs, smoothed everything out, and made body hair a non-issue because nobody could see through them anyway. Whether you shaved your legs or not was your own business, and most women didn't bother, because why would you? The stockings handled it, but nylon was also used to make parachutes, tire cords, and military rope. So when the war started, the US government diverted the entire nylon supply to the military. Stocking production stopped almost overnight, and suddenly, for the first time in modern American life, millions of women were walking around with bare legs in public. The razor companies moved fast. Within months of the nylon shortage, ads for women's leg razors were running in every major American magazine, and the messaging was calculated in a way that makes the 1915 Harper's Bazaar ad look subtle. These weren't just beauty ads. They wrapped hair removal in the American flag. The pitch went something like this. The boys are overseas fighting for your freedom. The least you can do is keep yourself looking sharp. Smooth legs weren't just attractive, they were patriotic. They were your contribution to the war effort. The ads showed women in factory uniforms with rolled-up sleeves and smooth, gleaming legs doing their part on two fronts. building planes at the assembly line and keeping up the feminine ideal at home. And then there were the pin-ups. Pin-up culture exploded during World War II. Illustrations and photographs of glamorous women were printed on posters, painted on the noses of bomber planes, tucked into the lockers of soldiers overseas. These images became one of the most visible cultural products of the entire war, and every single one of those women had one thing in common: perfectly smooth, completely hairless legs and arms and everything else. Betty Grable's famous pin-up photograph, the one where she's looking over her shoulder in a bathing suit, became the most requested image in the US military. Her legs were literally insured for $1 million by her studio, and those legs were smooth. That photograph didn't just sell a movie star, it sold a body standard. It told an entire generation of American men what a woman was supposed to look like, and it told an entire generation of American women what they were supposed to maintain. The war ended in 1945. Nylon came back. Stockings came back. But something had shifted permanently. During those 4 years without stockings, shaving your legs had gone from something a few women did to something normal women do. The razor companies had used a world war as a marketing opportunity, and by the time the soldiers came home, the habit was locked in. And then the beauty industry hit the gas. The post-war economic boom of the late 1940s and 1950s created a consumer culture unlike anything the world had ever seen. American households had money, they had televisions, and they had advertisers competing for every dollar. The beauty industry exploded during this period, and hair removal went from being an optional luxury, something you might do for a special occasion, to being filed under a completely different category: hygiene. That word did more work than any advertisement ever could. Because once you call hair removal hygiene, you've completely reframed what body hair is. Hygiene is about cleanliness. Hygiene is about health. If hair removal is hygiene, then having body hair is, what? Dirty? Unhealthy? The implication was never stated directly, but it didn't need to be. The word did the work on its own. And by the mid-1950s, that language was everywhere. Magazine ads, television commercials, advice columns in women's publications, all of them casually treating hair removal as part of basic personal care, as routine and unquestioned as washing your hands. Then came the bikini. In 1946, a French designer named Louis Rebrand introduced a two-piece swimsuit so small and so scandalous that no professional model in Paris would agree to wear it. He had to hire a nude dancer from the Casino de Paris to debut it. And he named it the Bikini, after the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific Ocean, where the United States had just tested a nuclear bomb. The name was intentional. Rebrand said the bikini would be as explosive as the bomb itself. He was right, just not in the way he expected. The bikini didn't just change swimwear. It detonated an entirely new zone of the female body into the hair removal conversation. Suddenly, there was a region that needed its own vocabulary: the bikini line, a phrase that didn't exist before 1946. Because the concept didn't exist before 1946. Women were now expected to manage hair in a place that had never been publicly visible in the entire history of Western clothing. By the end of the 1950s, the transformation was complete. A woman who didn't shave her legs wasn't making a fashion choice. She wasn't being countercultural. In the eyes of mainstream American society, she was letting herself go. The phrase itself tells you everything. Letting herself go implies that maintaining a hairless body is the natural state, and choosing not to is a form of giving up. The language had flipped completely. Hair removal was no longer something you opted into. It was something you'd be judged for opting out of. By the 1960s, shaving was so deeply normalized that most American women couldn't remember a time before it. It felt like it had always been this way. Like smooth legs and clean armpits were just how women were supposed to be, naturally, obviously, always. And that's exactly when a group of women decided to ask the most dangerous question of all: why? In the late 1960s, something started happening that the beauty industry had never dealt with before. Women started refusing. The second wave of American feminism was picking up speed, and body hair became one of its most visible battlegrounds. Women stopped shaving their legs. They stopped shaving their armpits. And they did it loudly, publicly, on purpose. Growing out your body hair wasn't a lapse in grooming. It was a political act, a way of saying, I know what you've been doing. I know you manufactured this standard, and I'm done participating. The most famous image from this era is the so-called bra burning at the 1968 Miss America protest in Atlantic City. Except, here's the thing, nobody actually burned a bra. What happened is that protesters threw bras, girdles, high heels, and copies of Playboy into a Freedom trash can on the Atlantic City boardwalk. A reporter compared it to draft card burning. The headline stuck, and suddenly, bra burner became the label for any woman who questioned beauty standards. Body hair got the same treatment. Almost immediately, mainstream media turned hairy legs into a punchline. Editorial cartoons in newspapers across America drew feminists as wild, unkempt, hairy creatures. Talk show hosts made jokes. The message was clear and deliberate. If you stop shaving, you're not making a point. You're making yourself ugly. You're one of those women. It was a brilliant deflection. Instead of engaging with the argument, which was that corporations had manufactured a fake insecurity to sell products, the conversation got rerouted to appearance. The question stopped being, why do women shave? And became, why do feminists look like that? And once the debate shifted to how the protesters looked, the actual protest didn't matter anymore. But the beauty industry's real masterstroke wasn't mockery. It was something much smarter. They agreed with the feminists, not with the substance, obviously, but with the language. Starting in the late 1970s and accelerating through the 1980s, beauty advertising underwent a complete rhetorical makeover. The old messaging, the shame-based language about being ugly or objectionable, quietly disappeared. In its place came something that sounded almost progressive: choice, confidence, self-care, empowerment. The new ads didn't say, shave because you're disgusting without it. They said, shave because you deserve to feel your best. They said, it's not about what anyone else thinks. It's about what makes you feel confident. They took the exact vocabulary that feminists had used to challenge the beauty industry and sold it right back to women as a reason to keep buying razors. And it worked. Because how do you argue with, it's your choice? If a woman says she shaves because it makes her feel good, who are you to tell her she's wrong? The framing made any further criticism of hair removal sound paternalistic. The industry had found the perfect shield. Empowerment language made the product unassailable. Meanwhile, the expectations kept expanding. In 1987, 7 Brazilian sisters opened a salon in Manhattan called the J Sisters. They introduced a waxing technique that removed nearly all pubic hair, something that had never been a mainstream beauty service in the United States. Within a decade, the Brazilian wax went from a niche curiosity in one Manhattan salon to a standard offering at spas and salons across the country. Hair removal was no longer about legs and armpits. The territory had expanded to include everything. By the 1990s, the beauty industry wasn't even pretending this was about hygiene anymore. It was about aspiration, about becoming your best self. And nowhere was that clearer than when Gillette launched the Venus razor in 2001. The tagline was, "Reveal the goddess in you." Think about how far the language had traveled in less than 90 years. In 1915, the message was, "Your body hair is embarrassing and ugly." In 2001, the message was, "Removing your body hair will connect you to something divine." Same product, same act, same razor scraping hair off skin. But the story wrapped around it had gone from shame to spirituality, from "you're disgusting" to "you're a goddess." The industry had learned that you don't need to make women feel bad to sell them something. You just need to make them feel like they could feel better. And by the time researchers actually studied the numbers, the results were staggering. Surveys from the early 2000s found that more than 90% of American women removed their leg hair regularly. More than 80% removed underarm hair. The Brazilian wax had normalized removing hair from places that, a generation earlier, weren't even part of the conversation. The feminist rebellion of the 1960s and 70s didn't just lose, it was absorbed. Its language was swallowed whole and repurposed to sell the very thing it had fought against. The women who refused to shave in 1970 were mocked, dismissed, and eventually drowned out, not by better arguments, but by better marketing. So the industry won. Hair removal became invisible. Not because women chose it freely, but because the choice itself was made to feel free. By the early 2000s, the system was so complete, so seamless, that questioning it felt almost absurd. But the story doesn't end there, because while American women were shaving everything, something strange was happening on the other side of the world. The playbook that worked in America didn't stay in America. Starting in the 1980s and accelerating through the 1990s and 2000s, Western beauty standards spread across the planet through 3 channels: Hollywood movies, television exports, and advertising budgets that dwarfed the GDP of some of the countries they were targeting. The pattern repeated everywhere. A culture where women's body hair was neutral, sometimes even considered attractive, would get a decade or two of heavy exposure to Western media. American movies, British television, European fashion magazines, and within a single generation, the standard would flip. Young women in countries from India to South Korea to Brazil started removing body hair that their mothers and grandmothers had never thought twice about. In parts of the Middle East, body hair on women had been considered a sign of fertility and maturity. In regions of South Asia, it carried no stigma at all. In Japan, attitudes toward body hair were complex and varied. But the aggressive full-body removal standard didn't exist until Western beauty brands entered the market in force. Bollywood is a perfect case study. Indian cinema in the 1960s and 70s featured actresses who looked like the women in their audience. By the 2000s, Bollywood's beauty standard had converged almost entirely with Hollywood's. Smooth skin, full hair removal, the same silhouette that Gillette had been selling since the Venus launch. The South Korean beauty industry, known globally as K-beauty, took it even further, building entire product lines around the idea that visible pores, texture, and yes, body hair were problems to be erased. None of this happened because women in Seoul or Mumbai independently decided they wanted to start shaving. It happened because a Western industry worth billions of dollars exported its standards along with its products. The same strategy that Wilkinson Sword used in 1915, create the insecurity, then sell the solution, just scaled to a global market. And the products kept evolving. Laser hair removal clinics spread through shopping malls in Dubai and Delhi and Sao Paulo. IPL devices, at-home laser systems costing hundreds of dollars, became bestsellers on every continent. Subscription razor services like Dollar Shave Club and its competitors turned hair removal into a recurring monthly charge, like a streaming service for your body. The global hair removal market crossed $4 billion and kept climbing. But here's something that almost never gets discussed alongside the revenue numbers: the physical cost. Ingrown hairs affect the majority of women who shave regularly. Razor burn, folliculitis, skin irritation. These aren't rare side effects. They're the standard experience. Depilatory creams cause chemical burns frequently enough that poison control centers track the calls. Waxing, especially Brazilian waxing, carries real risks of infection, scarring, and, in documented cases, hospitalization from staph infections. Laser hair removal can cause burns, blistering, and permanent skin discoloration, particularly on darker skin tones, which were often excluded from early clinical testing. These are medical consequences of a cosmetic standard, and they're treated as normal, expected, just part of the process. Women share tips for managing ingrown hairs the same way they share tips for managing split ends. The pain and the damage have been folded into the routines so thoroughly that questioning them sounds like complaining. Then social media made everything worse. Instagram and TikTok didn't just continue the beauty standard, they automated it. Smoothing filters became default on camera apps across every platform. Skin texture, pores, and body hair vanished from images before anyone even posted them. A generation of young women grew up scrolling through millions of photos and videos of female bodies and never once seeing body hair on any of them. Not because it had been shaved off, but because the software erased it before it could be seen. That's a new kind of invisible. The 1915 ad told women their hair was ugly. The 2020's filter doesn't even acknowledge it exists. But something small started pushing back. In 2018, a razor company called Billy ran an ad campaign that did something no razor brand had done in the entire history of razor advertising. They showed body hair, actual visible hair on women's legs and armpits, in an ad for the product designed to remove it. The campaign went viral, not because it was radical, but because it was the first time in over 100 years of razor advertising that anyone had acknowledged the hair was there at all. Women on Instagram and TikTok started posting photos of their body hair. Not as protest, not as political statements, just as normal. Comments like, "I just stopped and nothing bad happened," started showing up under posts from creators with millions of followers. Small cracks in a wall that had taken a century to build. For over 100 years, women have been told that their natural bodies need fixing, that the hair they were born with is a problem to be solved, a flaw to be managed, an embarrassment to be hidden. But maybe the most important thing about this story isn't what the beauty industry did. It's what happens when you finally see the machinery for what it is. So here's the thing about this story. It was never really about razors. Razors are just the delivery mechanism. The actual story is about a blueprint, a formula that was invented in the early 1900s and has been copied so many times since that you can find it running underneath almost every corner of the modern beauty industry. The formula is simple. Take something natural about the human body, something that has existed without complaint for centuries or millennia, then reframe it as a problem. Not a preference, not a style choice, a problem. Give it clinical-sounding language. Call it a concern, an issue, something to address. Then sell the solution at scale and repeat the messaging until the original state of the body feels like a defect. Teeth whitening follows the same pattern. Human teeth are naturally off-white to slightly yellow. That's healthy enamel. But a multi-billion-dollar industry has convinced millions of people that their natural tooth color is embarrassing. Anti-aging is the same blueprint. Wrinkles are what skin does when it's been alive for a while. But anti-aging as a category reframes aging itself as a disease. Something to fight, something to reverse, something wrong with you. Skin lightening products, worth billions globally, follow the identical logic. A natural skin tone, repackaged as an imperfection, with the solution conveniently available for purchase. The hair removal industry didn't invent this formula, but it was one of the first to prove it works. And once it worked, everyone else took notes. Now, here's where a documentary like this usually goes wrong. This is the part where the narrator is supposed to get on a soapbox and tell you what to do. Stop shaving. Throw out your razors. Reject the beauty industry. Reclaim your body. This video isn't going to do that, because telling someone to stop shaving is just replacing one instruction with another. And the whole point of everything you've just watched is that the problem was never the razor. The problem was the instruction. The problem was someone else deciding what you should do with your own body and then disguising that decision as your idea. What this documentary is asking is simpler than that, and honestly, harder. It's asking you to know the history, because here's the choice paradox. You can't make a free choice about something if you don't know how the choice got framed in the first place. And the vast majority of women who shave today have never heard of the 1915 Harper's Bazaar ad. They've never heard of the Wilkinson sword campaign. They don't know that the word hygiene was strategically attached to hair removal in the 1950s, or that empowerment was bolted on in the 1980s to neutralize feminist criticism. They think shaving is just what you do, that it's always been this way, that it's natural. And now you know it isn't. Not the shaving itself, but the feeling that you have to. That changes the math. It doesn't tell you what to choose, but it puts the actual choice back in your hands for what might be the first time. And if you want to see what a real choice looks like, go back 5,000 years, back to the Nile River Valley, back to ancient Egypt. Those Egyptian priests in the temples of Thebes, scraping every hair from their bodies with bronze blades and beeswax. They removed hair too, but they knew exactly why. It wasn't because an ad told them their bodies were ugly. It wasn't because a magazine said they should be embarrassed. It was ritual. It was devotion. It was a conscious decision made with full understanding of what it meant and why it mattered. They chose it, eyes open. No one had to trick them into it. 5,000 years later, roughly 85 million American women pick up a razor every morning. The question was never whether they shave. The only question that ever mattered, is whether they know why. And now, at least, you do. If you want to see how the exact same playbook was used on the bra, that video is on screen now.